right. Well, hey, everybody out there in podcast land or video land or whatever. I'm Landis Wade, and I'm here with Charlotte Readers Podcast. I'm happy to welcome you tonight to one of our Charlotte Readers live events that we're doing. We're getting away from the audio only tonight. We're doing video as well. And I've got two special guests. I've got Sara Johnson. Wave your hand, Sara. Wave your hand there. Sara Johnson and Valerie Nieman. Wave to us, Valerie. Yeah, there you go. They're both mystery writers, which is great because I'm in the throes of about to release a mystery book as well. So we thought it'd be fun to get together tonight and hey, talk about mystery writing. That's the topic. But on these live events that we do, it's a nice way not only to talk about mysteries, whereas on the regular podcast, Charlotte Readers Podcast, we just dive into the book itself. We're going to talk a little bit about the books tonight. We're also going to use some of the things that we all learned in writing the books to share some tips with others who might be interested in writing their own mysteries or just trying to figure out why we did the crazy things we did in our mysteries. We'll just see how that works. But we're going to start off tonight. I think I'm Landis Wade. I'm a recovering trial lawyer. I host Charlotte Readers Podcast. I've written a couple of books. I've written a mystery lately called Deadly Declarations. We're going to talk about that tonight. But I've had the pleasure to have both Valerie and Sara on Charlotte Readers Podcast with earlier books that they've written. Sara, an earlier book in her Alexa Glock Forensic Mystery series, which we're going to talk about tonight because she's got her third book out. And Valerie, we did poetry and we did your sort of dark thriller book too, I believe. Isn't that right?
To the Bones and the Leopard Lady book. We did them both.
Yeah, and I was thinking, as you said, when I thought back about that, To the Bones, and we got Sara with all these bones that she's, the bone track and the bones remember and everything bones. Yeah. So, y'all got something in common with the bones. Let's start off with sort of a little brief introduction of ourselves so people get to know a little bit about each of you and what you like to write. So Sara, start with you and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and what you like to write.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Landis, for having us. And also thank you for supporting writers the way you do on your podcast. You are just such a gift to all of us. So thank you. But anyway, my husband and I spent 9 months in New Zealand. And when I saw my first mud pot, I said, I have to kill someone here. So I came home from New Zealand and I've been writing the Alexa Glock Forensic Mysteries ever since. Alexa Glock is a forensic odontologist and The Bone Track is the third book in the series. And Alexa believes lips may lie, but teeth never do. So that's her motto.
That is great. Lips may lie, but teeth never do. And I'm interested, we might talk about your teeth and your forensics tonight because it's one of the things that makes Alexa Glock stand out, that and her name, by the way. So, we'll talk more about that too. Valerie, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and what you like to write.
Grew up in Western New York State, wander in the woods, and went into journalism and was a police beat reporter for many years, then an editor, and then went into teaching. So I've been around and about. I graduated from West Virginia University and Queen's University of Charlotte. And for this book, I sort of pulled together both ends of my life. It partly came from some high school memories and also from my time sailing up at Lake Carr, which is sort of northeast of Raleigh. And so if I'm not writing, I'm now retired, I'm either hiking or city walking. I love to be a funner and just wander around and look at things in San Francisco and New York and wherever I can get to. I hiked in Scotland across the country, and I fly fish and garden, and I'm working on a 100-year-old bungalow.
Wow.
You got your hands full in addition to writing as well. Yeah, well, those are great backgrounds for writing. I love how, Sara, you said, this is a great place to kill someone, not physically but literally, and I've had several guests on the podcast who talk about that when it comes to mysteries. One who was from Chicago, Tracy Clark, she talked about how, she'll be riding down the road and she'll see a culvert or something and think, oh, that'd be a great place to hide a body, right there. and so it's the way these minds work, you just have to let your imagination
That's right.
run a little bit. So that's great. So I thought tonight, before we get into the discussion about mystery writing, that we would talk a little bit about the books themselves. We will go kind of in reverse order this time. We started with you, Sarah. We'll start, Valerie, with you this time. I want you to talk a little bit about In the Lonely Backwater, which I've read, by the way, and fascinating book. We'll talk about the fact that there are all different kinds of mysteries, and this one's kind of told through this narrator that you're not sure whether you believe her or not, when you're reading the book. So it's an interesting approach. But tell us a little bit about In the Lonely Backwater for us.
Well, it is a murder mystery, but as you said, there are other mysteries, deeper mysteries. It's a story of obsession, family dysfunction, gender non-performing girls, and how we become something, a scientist, a writer that we passionately desire to be. So 17-year-old Maggie wants to get out of Dodge. She lives at a rundown marina with her father in eastern North Carolina. She's an outsider at school, and she just has these many passions, including, particularly, she becomes engrossed in the life of Carl Linnaeus, the great botanist. And this is the way she's sort of making her world make sense by categorizing the world around her. This is all sort of working until her beautiful cousin Charisse turns up dead on a boat in the marina, and all of her plans begin to unravel. Unexplained incidents resolve into a mysterious stranger who seems to be stalking her, while the investigation by a seemingly sympathetic detective leaves her struggling to hold on to her many secrets: her father's alcoholism, her mother's abandonment, a boyfriend who may or may not exist, and her own actions on prom night. As the detective gets closer to finding the truth and Maggie's stalker is closing in, she's forced to come to terms with the one person who might hold the answers, herself.
That's a great pitch. You've honed that well, because it kind of brings everything together for the book. When I was reading it, I was fascinated with the setting. It just felt like, I've been to those lake marina boathouse, kind of, you can smell, the water just smells a little bit different. There's mud around the edges, you can see the trailers and then there are the nice houses over here. So where is this, Valerie, in your imagination, this lake that serves as the setting for the book?
Well, it's based pretty closely on Lake Carr, which is right on the border of North Carolina and Virginia, up northeast of Raleigh. And it's a lake that's connected to Lake Gaston, which a lot of people may know more because that's the more developed kind of lake. But this is quite an undeveloped and lonely lake with lots of wildlife, eagles and otters. And yeah, it's wonderful. So
yeah, I have to resist here not to go into my podcast interview mode here, because I could just keep going with questions about this, including the title. I think the title fits very well, In the Lonely Backwater, because of the way you describe the setting, which I thought was done very well. But we'll come back to that as we talk about mystery writing and work it in. But let's jump to a totally different setting, a setting down under, so to speak. This trip that you took that resulted in not just one book, not two books, but now the Bone Track is your third book, Sarah. So tell us about the Bone Track.
That's right. So Alexa is a total science nerd, and she loves her work, but she's taking a little time off work in the Bone Track to do a hiking trail with her brother Charlie. And Charlie flies over from North Carolina, and they are not close. Charlie and Alexa are not close, and Alexa's looking at this trip as a way to maybe reconnect with her brother, but it's not going too well. And on the second day of the 4-day hike, Alexa is hiking alone. It's raining, and she is almost killed by a rock slide. So she is suddenly cut off from the other hikers. She has to ford a river to get to the other side to rejoin the trail. And when she does, she sees a hand jutting out from the rocks. And she immediately thinks it was somebody killed in the rock slide, but no, then she sees that it's bones. And Alexa being Alexa, she just throws off her backpack. She never goes anywhere without her crime kit and her dental probe. So she spends about 2 hours excavating this skeleton and makes two important discoveries. One, he has modern amalgam fillings. So this body is probably 10 years old or less. And then the other thing she notices is notches and incision marks on the rib cage. And she's like, oh my gosh, this guy has been stabbed. And so she hightails it to the closest lodge, which happens to be the luxury lodge, not where she's staying. And she runs in, it's getting dark, and she tells people what she found. But she runs into another problem. One of the luxury hikers hasn't shown up. So there's a missing hiker. So she joins the search party for the missing hiker. The woman's body is discovered by a swollen river, and Alexa does a little investigating and sees that this is murder as well. So her hiking trip is interrupted, and she and Charlie are just sort of thrown into this chaos of solving two murders.
Yeah, and I was really fascinated with the Milford track. I'd never heard of it, but it sounds like it's now very overpopulated with visitors from all over the world who want to be on this tiny
Yes,
track.
but I will say they do limit the number of people that can go. So you only 40 people can go a day. And of course, it's so big, you can spread out. So it's hard to get a spot. But once you're there, it's you feel like you're in a remote area without a lot of people.
Yeah, and the way you described it's clearly, and you got these swinging bridges that are going.
Oh, they're terrifying.
Yeah.
I'll never forget my husband jumping in front of me and jumping up and down. I'm like, oh, I cannot believe you're doing that to me.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, those are two great settings. I'll wind it up here with just a little brief thing about my book. My setting is it's not as wild as the Milford Track in New Zealand. It's also not this lonely backwater. It's Charlotte, North Carolina, New South City, but it's we're tying the present to the past. However, I will say that it is in a interesting setting, and that is in a retirement community, and lots of interesting things happen in retirement communities, or so I've been told. I moved my parents there, and I've learned a lot since then. In fact, the other day, my mother, this might end up in the next book. I'm asking people to tell me cool stories about retirement communities, but she said they solved the mystery of the missing mink coats. I said, what are you talking about, Mom? She says, well, about 20 mink coats went missing, here. And I'm like, what happened? So after this woman died, found 20 mink coats in her closet. She'd been taking them from where they hang their coats for dinner. And nobody knows whether she's doing it on purpose or whether she had dementia and just couldn't remember what her coat looked like. But anyway, that's the kind of mystery stories that end up in my mystery. But actually, in this particular book, I put three retirees together. They're kind of coming together in an unlikely way. A lawyer ends up there at a retirement community. He doesn't want to be there. He's getting kicked out of his big law firm, thinks his life is over. He meets a couple of other characters, one who's kind of a conspiracy theorist, and the other who's a very stable, she's the stable one in the group, tries to keep the men in line. But they find out that early in the book, a resident, a friend of theirs, a friend of the two residents who are already there, dies. He's 96 years old. And when they find his body, his manuscript on the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence is missing. And they don't know why. And then they find a handwritten will that he's left his $50 million fortune to the most despised resident at the Independence Retirement Community. And so this sets them off to try to discover, why it was missing, why the money was transferred this way. It's kind of a lighthearted legal thriller. We do end up going down this path of trying to discover the answer to a mystery that hadn't been solved in 250 years. And so, yeah, the setting is not, it's not as unique in the sense of where you are in the backwater or down under, but it's part of Charlotte that I think few people who even live here know about. I mean, it's kind of like history hiding in plain sight, and that's why I liked dealing with that. And we're going to talk about some of that too when it comes to mystery writing. But yeah, so those are great summaries, everybody, of the books. And as viewers, as you can see, 3 different kind of mysteries, which kind of leads us into this topic of mystery writing. Mysteries come in all forms. I mean, we have, you can go all the way back to the Agatha Christie mystery series, one of the most famous mystery writers of all time. Hers had a certain formula she followed. I don't want to say formula, but the way she went through it. You have the traditional police procedurals, you have the hard-boiled procedurals, you have the amateur detective stories, you have the cozy mysteries, the very graphic, then you have the murder that's off stage and it's just sort of body in the. So I thought it'd be fun to start out talking a little bit about although we as authors hate to pigeonhole our books to some extent, but trying to figure out, if somebody were to ask us, well, what kind of mystery is your mystery?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit, and we'll flip it back again to start with Sara this time first.
All right. Well, as I said before, the Alexa Glock mysteries are forensic mysteries. So Alexa must use forensic science to help solve a crime. And it's in the vein of maybe Kathy Reichs or Patricia Cornwell, though I thought Patricia got really too graphic for me in her later books. But I would also say the Bone Track is very much a police procedural. Alexa always has to team up with the police, and in her mind, she works with them, not for them. She doesn't like to have people tell her what to do. And in this particular book, you spoke of Agatha Christie. This is, I would say, also a locked room mystery, because it's a just small group of people. They've been cut off by this landslide, and a swing bridge is out, and they're stuck together, and the murderer is among them, at least for one of the murders anyway. So it's sort of a cross genre.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of the Murder on Orient Express. You got everybody on a train on those rails. Everybody's on that Milford track, and you can't get off over it. You'll get lost. So they're all kind of going
That's
down
right.
this rail, and they can't go backwards because there are people coming in, and also there's been a rock slide. They can't go backwards. So the only way to go is forward, and they got to go together. And they're looking around the room to figure out
Exactly.
who did it and who didn't do it, and that kind of thing. Okay. So Valerie, how would you classify your mystery?
It's interesting you mentioned locked room, because in some ways mine is also as well. It's an isolated community, and so any incident sort of ripples out in this small area. I call it a Southern Gothic mystery. It has elements that we connect with writers like Flannery O'Connor. The definition being irrational, horrific, and transgressive thoughts, desires, and impulses, grotesque characters, dark humor, and overall angst-ridden sense of alienation, which I think pretty much covers it. While it's anchored in a gritty rural reality and in the rigors of scientific investigation, because Maggie's a science nerd too, it also has mysteries beyond the primary incident, the death of Charisse. I've just seen a review that's going to be coming out, and so it's got me right in the heart. Fred Chappell wrote, "This novel is an intricate and intriguing work of art." Its intricacies are not mere twists of plotline. They are necessary and inevitable. They redefine in a serious manner the term mystery.
Wow, what a tribute, Valerie.
Yeah, that's great. That is a great review, and it is a different, and you use some interesting terms. Angst. There's a lot of angst in the book. Alienation. She was definitely alienated. She was not part of the cool crowd, and then the couple of kids she hung out with, she starts getting divorced from them for various reasons. So she really is alone, and a lot of times that's where you find your protagonist. Whether they're a police investigator or not. Sarah Alexa's running for her life sometimes too. She's the investigator, but yet she's in harm's way. And
right.
in your case, Valerie, the same is true. She's kind of helping to investigate, trying to, but you kind of wonder about her, because you use various techniques, Valerie, and we'll maybe talk a little bit about that as we get through this. But let me just, I'll wrap it up in terms of classifying mysteries. I really don't, I wasn't sure what I was writing. I think I decided it's kind of a lighthearted legal thriller with a mystery built into it. I mean, I think all books have mysteries, right? I mean, if you don't have a mystery, in your book, something that's going to get people to turn pages, get them to wonder what's coming next. So when we talk about mysteries, I would say most books are going to have some kind of mystery in them. In this sense, what I'm trying to do, I do put a body in chapter 1. I mean, I do follow that trope, so we, and because we're going to have to find out what happened to the body, but I'm not as, in mine, it's not as much about forensics as it is, in yours, Sarah. And it's not as, I'm not in one person's head, Valerie, like you are, and do very well, in your book, where we're seeing all these things from this one narrator. And I use the courtroom a little bit to explore the mystery, because I bring that knowledge from my years as a trial lawyer. And plus I call it lighthearted because I like to have the humor, in the book. And so the way I'm trying to do this, it does fall into, if you're trying to brand it, so it does fall in the mystery thriller suspense category. And probably more in the cozy category, because it's set in a retirement community with 3 characters who are dealing with the issues of aging and the fun that comes with that, and also the challenges that come with that. And so that's why you put it in the cozy. Now, I don't know about somebody who blogged the book wasn't sure that the book cover looked as much cozy, because most cozies have more of a cartoonish, look to them on the cover. But I went with that blend because I wanted to have the mech deck kind of on fire on the cover of the book, because of the fact that it did burn historically in 1800.
Yeah.
So
I love the cover.
Thank you. And so we got 3 different kind of mysteries, which is great. And there are many more mysteries out there than that. And I think people, love mysteries, and they love the fact that, there are clues and everything that go with them. We might talk about clues in a minute, but let's talk about this idea of, the body in the first chapter, or the inciting incident, or the hook, or whatever. Because whenever you're writing a mystery, I don't know about y'all, but y'all have written a number of books now, and you've written 3 mysteries in a series, Sarah. That first chapter or 2 is very important because people only have so much time, and if they're not drawn into the book, they're going to lose you. So I sort of lost track about who went first when, but I'll start. We'll start, Sarah, since I mentioned you. Talk about this idea of the inciting incident, the hook, when it comes to a mystery, and what you think about when you're trying to make sure that those first 30 pages are,
It's so important. It's so important. So I have what I consider a hook. And later when we're going to read, I am going to read from the first chapter, but my first sentence, and it's not even a sentence, oh dear, it's a sentence fragment, but it's 9 bodies. So the book starts off with 9 bodies. And I'm hoping, and then Alexa goes on to, in her head, we know what she's thinking about, but I use that as a hook. It's really, Alexa's already working on a case when the book opens, and she's thinking about it. And I want my reader to wonder, okay, 9 bodies, who are these, And so that's how I tried to hook my reader. But I also wanted to establish Alexa's everyday life. Whereas I think my inciting incident comes, it's 20%, I measured it, it's 20% through the book. So I spent a couple chapters, let's see, it's on page 73. So I spent 70 chapters in the hike, with Charlie and Alexa's relationship, establishing the setting. And it's during that rock slide that I talked about earlier, when Alexa sees that hand, that, the sinister really gets the ball rolling for the 2 mysteries to be solved. So I personally don't mind if a writer takes their time getting to the inciting incident, if it's well written and I'm enjoying the character. I read a book recently by Nio Marsh, a New Zealander who wrote 32 mysteries, and she didn't get to the inciting incident until page 141. And it was just a 250-page book. And I'm like, maybe that's too long.
I don't think we can call that, I don't think we can call that the inciting incident.
You're right. But it was that the body was on page 141.
That's like lighting a fire when it's gone out, you know?
It is totally. So I don't mind. I worried about doing it myself. I worried with not, but I think I'm getting confident enough to know that I can wait a little while before Alexa stumbles over the body.
Yeah, and it's different, I guess, in every book, but you do have to kind of hook the readers in terms of what it's about early on and get them pulled in. Now, Valerie, talk about that from your perspective. You read suspense, now you got this mystery. You write poetry too. I don't know how that ties into poetry as well, but economy of words. But clearly, hooking a reader early on is important in writing a mystery. Talk about that in your case.
Well, the body doesn't appear until chapter 6 in mine, but the tone is set right away because Charisse is missing. After prom, she's disappeared, and so they're looking for her. So you've got that, sense of this isn't normal, this isn't right. And first, maybe she was just with a boy or something, but we certainly begin to feel that ominous overtone. And so those first pages are really more devoted to the relationship between Maggie and Charisse right at the get-go, where she's talking about how she gets along or doesn't get along with her cousin, and then establishing her sort of subsidiary mystery with her finding the work of Linnaeus in this burgled church. And that got her started on that particular obsession. I think it's important to get the reader something right away to grab them. It doesn't necessarily have to be the body, but it better be something pretty interesting. I opened To the Bones with the guy waking up in a hole in the ground full of bones. He'd been thrown down a mine crack. So it wasn't his body, but there were bodies.
Yeah, that was like a creepy, hitting people kind of opening there, He wakes up and he puts his hand out and there's a skull next to him. Yeah. That was bizarre. Yeah. So my book opens with a letter. It's a letter from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson talking about, the biggest curiosity and deepest mystery that ever occurred to him, which is the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, to kind of set the stage for what's going to be involved. And then it's the second chapter where you meet the characters and you do find a body at the end there. But, those who read the book know that it's not so much about the body. It is about the body. You are trying to find out, what happened to him. But I'm a big believer in trying to make sure that at the end of each chapter, there's something that want the reader to go to the next chapter. So we're talking about openings, we're talking about hooks. It's important to follow your editor's advice, I think, and y'all probably agree with this too. And that is, kill off anything that's not advancing the story, right? You got to be moving forward. If you're moving in reverse, maybe that's something we should talk about just in terms of pace for a moment. I think, Sara, you keep up the pace because of the Milford track and the people that are coming and passing, and okay, they're getting away from us. We got to go find them. We got to interview them and that kind of thing. And Valerie, you keep up the pace, I think, with just the strangeness in this head of this young girl that, all the things that she's experiencing and seeing and doing and the events around her. But talk about pace for a second. I'll start with you, Valerie.
I took some risks with this book because it is a first person narrator. So you're inside that head. And I think it can get pretty claustrophobic in there. So I have these sort of, I don't know what you'd call them, but the letters that her grieving father writes to his missing wife, who just sends them back. He never can make contact with her, but he keeps trying. And he leaves them laying around, and so Maggie reads them. And there are other things, particularly excerpts from Linnaeus that she thinks are particularly pertinent to her life at that moment. A clip from the newspaper, overheard conversations and rumors. And I thought it it was a little bit of a chance to, to pull back, but I think it was necessary so it just didn't become, so wound into itself, and give a little light.
Yeah. And so talk about pace too, Sarah, as you're thinking about revision of the book when you're going back, to kind of keep the pace moving.
Yeah, I think you've already mentioned keep the reader wanting to turn the page. So end each chapter with a little cliffhanger. I limit my chapters to about 10 pages or less per chapter. I think that helps my readers with the forward momentum. And then also what you said, just the fact that they're on a hiking trip, a 4-day hiking trip. It has a beginning, it has an end, and so does a novel. And so the hiking trip itself really helped me keep up the pace. That won't be true for every book, but it certainly was for this book.
Yeah, and Valerie, you used a technique. I used something similar in the sense that I was dropping in letters and transcripts and different things, and you dropped in sort of sometimes these 1-page, well, you describe them, as to what you were doing with that technique, because it wasn't always a linear story being told by this protagonist. You would drop in some things from time to time about nature, about, talk about that.
Yeah, in addition to the bits of Linnaeus, she's also considers herself a scientist, and so she's writing observations. So there are these little 1 page where she's looking at different birds and animals and sort of analyzing them and talking about where they fit in the great tree of life. And so there are her journals, Linnaeus's journals, and then these other items. But I think they all they're helping to unravel the mystery of who Maggie is and why she thinks and does as she does, which is this balance between science on one side and what she calls fictionalizing, which is making things up on the other.
Well, I got to ask you, Valerie, did some of your young students help you with those chapters you wrote that were kind of on WhatsApp or, the texting back and forth?
No, but the funny thing is this book has been so long in developing that when I wrote it originally, I was using MySpace. And I had to convert that stuff into Facebook. And then she gets very down on social media because of bullying and what goes on with Charisse. And so she doesn't move on to Snapchat. She kind of, ends with messaging and then she gets out of it. So it's a little maybe not accurate to what a lot of teenagers are doing today, but she's kind of quirky. And she's also out where they didn't have internet for a long time. So.
Well, let's do this. We're talking about hooks, talking about pace. We're going to have just a couple of short readings from the books, and then we're going to get into some things like characters and plot and settings a little bit. So we'll start, Valerie, with your reading here. We've already kind of set the books up, so we know a little bit about the characters, but if anything you want to say before you read this little piece, you're welcome to.
It's a memory of prom night, and Maggie is at a cemetery with her 2 friends, Hulky and Nat. These are the kind of kids who don't go to prom. And so they're drinking in the graveyard.
Key the dark, mysterious music and the black background.
Charisse showing up at Old Trinity was about the last thing any of us had expected. She'd come wheeling up in the Jag, staggering in to find someone to talk to, where she knew we'd be. "Hey guys," she said, weaving over the fresh cut grass. Hulky let her have the big Robard stone he always sat on, then hovered. Nat and I sat opposite her on each end of the Brackenbill tomb. She sang a couple of slurred lines from Beauty and the Beast. You could guess what role she had in our production. And kicked her feet, her painted toenails glittering where the moonlight showed through, her ankles white and the bottoms of her feet black. "Where's your shoes?" Hulky asked. "One here, one there." She lifted her legs in a gymnast pose until her beaded dress slipped to the tops of her thighs, and Nat got up and walked away into the dark under the cedar trees. "Here." Hulky pulled off his shoes and socks, set them down beside her, his favorite Chuck Taylors. Maggie has all the boys, Charisse said. Yeah, I muttered. No, it's true. You have boys, she dragged out, and you have friends. You have boyfriends. Charisse, just go home. I could drive you. Hulky, of course. Charisse shook her head slowly and emphatically, one side to the other and back, like something mechanical. Why'd you come here, Charisse? I asked. She kept staring into the trees. You don't want anything to do with us in the daylight. She didn't answer me, just talked into the dark. I thought maybe we should bury the hatchet. That didn't make me feel any more comfortable. We'd been cutting eyes at each other for weeks, got into arguing loud and heavy by her locker one day until she said one thing too many and I slapped her. Then she made those comments on my Facebook page, calling me a sad, pathetic liar, and me commenting back harder. She stood up, teetering for a moment from the uneven ground or her uneven equilibrium. Actually, she said, I'd rather kiss and make up.
No, that's great. Yeah, in a graveyard, and things don't turn out well for one of the people I've seen, right? And then the book keeps going from there. I'm just curious, before we move to the reading from the Bone Track, Valerie, did you have in mind how the story was going to end when you started writing this mystery? I mean, there are different writers approach it different ways, and I noticed from the acknowledgments that you have that you talked about revisions and going back to deal with the ending. So did you have an idea at the beginning, but you just revised it later?
Yeah, the voice of Maggie was really, really present right from the beginning. And I knew that Charisse was going to be dead, but I really wasn't sure how that took place and what happened. And I kept working on the ending and changing it around. And I had to go to the difficult place in terms of that ending, which, sometimes it's easy to avoid. It's like, oh, we'll just, make it end this way and this will be fine. And no, it wasn't fine. So
Yeah.
I didn't really know how the ending would be. And it did go through many revisions.
Well, that's interesting. Well, Sara, when you're writing, you're writing the series, has it evolved for you from book 1 to book 3 to where you kind of now do more planning and know the ending than maybe?
Yeah.
What you did in the
Yes.
beginning?
Yes. Yes to all that.
Okay. Explain why, because you got to get another
Well,
book
I
out.
would say book 4 that I'm working on now, I have plotted out meticulously. Whereas when I was on Charlotte Reader's podcast with the Bones Remember, I had not plotted that book. And I just want to see if meticulous plotting is going to improve my writing. It's sort of an experiment I'm going through. So I've meticulously plotted it. Every hook, every purpose for every scene. If it doesn't have a purpose, I'm throwing it out, the cliffhanger, the characters, and I don't know if it's going to pay off or not. We'll see with the 4th book.
At least you'll know where you're going. How have you found that do you use any particular tools to do that, or you just kind of create an outline?
It's funny. I created an outline and I wrote it in the present tense. And now that I'm writing the book, it's like I'm all messed up with my tense. So if I do this again,
that'll teach you to do an outline. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But Valerie, you have such a beautiful reading voice, and just that image of the ankles being white and the bottom of the feet being dark, from the dirt. That's really stuck with me. So that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the book is very lyrical. It's it does. I don't know if you've seen the Ozarks on Netflix, Valerie. It's a very dark movie set in the Ozarks on the lake there, and a lot of bad things happen around that lake. You might want to look at that because I thought about some of that, the loneliness, of that environment. All right. Well, Sara, how about you got a little reading for us? Anything you want to say to set
All
it
right,
up?
I don't need to set this up because this is chapter 1,
All right.
right from the get-go. 9 bodies. That's how many were excavated 3 days ago on the coastal road near Wellington, New Zealand. Alexa Glock stepped around someone's outstretched legs in the airport waiting room and continued pacing. 9 times 206, the number of bones in a mature skeleton, more if the remains included children. She hoped children weren't involved. She imagined the driver's face as the bulldozer lifted the bones. What the hell, he'd probably said. He would have cut the engine, jumped from the cab, hoping and praying the bones weren't human. The skull, its large eye sockets, leaking dirt, brought the road construction to a halt. Stared right at me, he told the project's archaeologist. A loudspeaker announced the arrival of an Air China flight. Alexa was waiting for her younger brother, Charlie. His plane was an hour late. He had left North Carolina 24 hours earlier. He didn't know that tomorrow morning, on the way to the hiking trip they were taking, they'd make a pit stop so Alexa could meet with the archaeologist, who was keeping the location of the bones a secret. We don't want stalkers and gawkers, she had said. The bones would probably be historic remains of the country's indigenous people, the Maori. They were being stored until she could get there. The local iwi or tribe would take guardianship if they were historic. But what if they weren't old bones? Alexa's specialty, teeth, would tell the tale.
There you go. Teeth would tell the tale. And I've learned a little bit about teeth. I didn't realize that after you pass on, the bacteria go away and the teeth survive, and it's while we have all the bacteria while we're living that's what tears the teeth apart, right?
That's right. That's right. Teeth are often found, at archaeology sites because they are so long lasting.
And they preserve the DNA, which is
That's right.
wonderful to be able to then go back and see who these people were.
That's right.
Yeah, and I do like the opening line, where you got 9 bodies. That's how many were excavated 3 days ago, and she's right there in the mix there right away. I know I asked you this on the podcast, but tell me again why you became obsessed with teeth, Sara.
I wanted to find how do you make your novel stand out? Well, why not place it in New Zealand? Because a lot of people are interested in New Zealand. And why not give my forensic investigator a really interesting niche? So I just thought odontology was fascinating. And the more I find out about it, the more I love it and know I made the right choice. But I am finding that I can't always rely on teeth for Alexa. I mean, Alexa has to look at fingerprints and she has to look at hair strands and other things, but I always will try to tie teeth into each one of the mysteries.
I loved what you had about the bite marks.
That's fun.
That's been sort of overturned because they use bite marks, but then they said they're not always reliable.
That is
they
so
can be.
true.
Yeah, but I thought that was fascinating how that plays into your mystery.
Yes, good, thanks.
All right, well, I'm gonna do a quick one, and then we'll go to a couple other topics here. This is early in the book, Deadly Declarations, and this is in the point of view of Chuck Yeager Alexander. He's 75 years old. He's a bit of a character, a little bit of a conspiracy theorist. Seems to know everything, but he's optimistic to a fault, and sometimes that drives his friends crazy. Anyway, one of his best friends is the professor, and he's supposed to be going on a trip with him today. Professor has a surprise for him, but he sees an ambulance at the condo building where the professor lives. He goes upstairs and he finds, that the professor has died. And this is when he sneaks into the room to look after they've taken the body away. The professor was a man who never threw away books, even though they were torn and worn. Where there wasn't enough space on the professor's shelves, books spilled onto the floor or were stacked in corners. The one concession he made to what seemed at first glance like disorder was how he grouped his books by topic. The sections Yeager liked the best held the Revolutionary War books, and out of habit, he glanced toward his favorite section and was surprised to see the shelves were empty. These books were missing, even the books about the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. Yeager was one of the few people who could ask the professor questions about the Mech Deck without the professor getting riled up. Yeager's mother told him there were no stupid questions, so he kept asking them one after another. It made the professor laugh. Chuck Yeager Alexander, you think you're related to Hezekiah Alexander, the professor would say. You want the story to be true. The professor had been adamant that the Mech Deck never existed. It's a fairy tale, nothing more. But a week ago, in a strange twist, things changed. Yeager, you can't tell anyone what I'm about to tell you. I'm working on a sequel to An American Hoax. An American Hoax was the professor's best-selling book. They debunked the Mech Deck story once and for all. Why did the professor need to write a sequel? What more could he say? It seemed like overkill to say it twice, but Yeager kept his thoughts to himself when the professor told him about the sequel. Something was different and serious about the professor's behavior that day. And over the next 5 days, the professor ordered his meals sent to his room, and every time Yeager checked them, he was hard at work on his laptop. He said he needed to finish the book before it was too late, but he didn't explain the urgency. Yesterday, Yeager stopped by at lunchtime. The professor was wearing the same clothes from the day before. He hadn't slept. He'd acted nervous, like he had too much coffee, and Yeager encouraged him to take a break. I can't. Well, why not? The professor's nervous energy must have provided a spark. His face lit up. I found something that changes everything. Yeager wondered what that meant. Would the professor's sequel reveal the Mech Deck was not a hoax after all? And if so, what had the professor found? He asked the professor to explain, but the only answer he got was, wait until tomorrow. Meet me at 8 a.m. and pack an overnight bag. Now, the professor was dead.
That's great.
Yeah, just kind of pulling in. And it's funny, interesting, I don't know about y'all, but when you're trying to think through plots, because we're going to talk about characters and plots now, the Mech Deck wasn't the original plot of my story. I've been podcasting and I had been not writing as much as I wanted to write. Podcasting got to be real busy. And I was learning a lot from people and I was just kind of taking it in. I was writing a little bit. I was writing a mystery in a retirement community. There was a will involved, but it wasn't until I interviewed Scott Seifert on my podcast, who wrote the nonfiction book on the Mech Deck, that I got fascinated with the story. And I said, hey, Scott, are you going to write the novel, man? And he goes, no, you write it. And I said, well, okay. I said, but if I do, will you look it over and give me some feedback, which he graciously did. And from then on, I got really engaged in writing the book. I mean, I'd sort of been slumbering along at some point. So I'm wondering about that for the two of you, because you can't always just pull up inspiration, for the story. And y'all both found a storyline that you enjoyed with this and that you were, I think, drawn to. And I'm just curious, how did you find it? Starting with you, Valerie. I mean, you've got this great setting here. You've got this interesting character. I think you said the voice came to you in your head. Maybe that's what got you going with the book. I'm not sure. Maybe it was the character first and the plot sort of came along later.
Well, Maggie's voice really does carry the book. She's this balance of high intelligence and naivete. I mean, she's kind of in this isolated place. There is a lot of me in her, or her in me, because I was a solitary child rambling the woods. She's drawn to science and that precision of observation and analysis, which kind of allies her with Sherlock Holmes and that kind of similar detectives. Yet at the same time, she's given to fantasizing or fictionalizing as a survival strategy in a world where she just doesn't fit in anywhere. Of course, clues have got to be shown and secrets revealed. It's a mystery. But I think the most crucial thing in Backwater is that slow peeling back of Maggie's character, as one mystery of Sharice's death is compounded by an unknown person who's wandering around near the marina and making little constructions and seemingly stalking her, and Maggie's interactions with these characters, living, dead, missing, and fictional. The other lead character is the detective, Drexel Van, who gains Maggie's grudging respect and eventually becomes a sort of father figure. He really developed during the writing and revision. Kind of starting out, he was kind of a cipher when he started, but he became more and more nuanced as he interacted with Maggie. And I think, in fact, I wrote an essay on this. all of the detectives and police that I worked with for years as a police reporter, I mean, they're all kind of up there in my head. And there's one particular detective who I really liked because he was very low key. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't, acting like, he was really low key and persistent. And so I modeled Drexel Van very much on him. And I was really happy to see, I went looking to see whatever happened to him. He became the chief of police eventually and is now retired. But I was really happy to have that background to craft what I believe is a worthy character.
Yeah, and I would say that I was drawn to the protagonist because she was dealing with an alcoholic father. Her living conditions weren't great. The way you described the shower she had to put up with at the little boathouse that she lived in, a house on that floats, a little bit different than most of her friends at school. Yeah, you started pulling for her. You wanted her to get out. You wanted her to, get a scholarship somewhere and make it out of there. And so, but this mystery is holding her back, and her family and everybody else is holding her back. And so it's, I think, and your point about, writing some characters that I think brings richness to the character. And I'm just curious, as a segue here to you, Sara, I'm sure you've been asked this, but Alexa Glock is a spunky character. She doesn't take instructions from men. Is there a little bit of Alexa and Sara?
When I first started writing my first book, I had a hard time separating myself from Alexa, but I got through that. We have nothing in common. Well, I'm fascinated with forensics, so I would say we have that in common. But no, people say I'm nice, and I have nice relationships I like children and dogs, and
yeah.
So she's really a fun character to create.
But she's more than just that one dimension, because in this book she's trying to come to terms with her brother. She's trying to be a good sister, and so I'm sure she's all in some family relationships and in that regard. And I'd say all authors, to some extent, there's this thing about, people say, well, don't write what be so confining, and yet write what is kind of what and also what you research, and so you can bring in some of your own experiences and your research experiences too. And I have to admit that it's kind of hard for me to say that I have nothing in common with a 65-year-old lawyer heading toward retirement. I did not tackle my managing partner kicked out of the law firm, I can say that, but I had to put Craig Travail kind of on his heels when the book starts to make that happen. But I have found that being around that experience, the age group, or knowing people in an environment, it kind of sometimes works its way in to your writing. I don't know if that's true for y'all, but and this gets to the point, characters over plot. When I asked John Hart, who was on the show, what was more important, he said, clearly characters. Now we're talking about mysteries here, folks. Everybody's going to say, wait a minute, mysteries, the plot's got to be the most important thing. But let's talk about that for a minute, because I think you said something like, you can have really great characters, and you can have, your plot might not be the best in the world, but you'll have a good book. But if you have a really great plot but lousy characters, people might not get past the 4th or 5th chapter. So let's speak to that a minute, how important that is, and how important it is to develop characters that people are going to like and relate to.
Yeah.
Who wants to take that first? So Valerie, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love your characters. I love Chuck Yeager.
I do too.
I think he's a hoot, and he was my particular favorite.
Right.
And so your main character is wonderful, but Chuck kind of stole the show for me.
I know it's funny, because I don't know if y'all have this experience, but he kept showing up in every scene. I mean, I'd be writing a scene with these characters, and Yeager would just bust in, and he want to have something to say, And my sister, who did an early read, she said, now you need to change this and this, but I don't want you to change anything about Chuck. Just leave him alone. Put him in more scenes, by the way. So, I think it is the characters. And Valerie, you've got the first person character here.
Mhm.
Person. So obviously she's got to be complex. She's got to have something that people can understand, whether they've experienced it or not, and so in fact, I would say probably your book is driven significantly more by the character than the plot. I mean, the plot is there. I don't know, would you agree with that or comment on that or something?
Yeah, I have to admit that I have sort of backed into mystery and crime writing. I
Right.
started out as a poet and science fiction writer. And so I write all over the map, which is not good in terms of marketing, but I just write the stories that come, and I get some sort of a mental itch that can't be scratched. A few years back, I wrote a Southern crime novel, and then the Appalachian folk horror mystery, and that one I plotted because I was trying to play with a lot of different genres. People have identified, there's romance in it, there's even a Western in it, along with, and so I thought I'm going to follow the very basic 3-act structure, the standard plot, because there was so much going on.
Mhm.
But with this one, it came together from these different threads and just built. I mean, part of it was my sailing experience, and I had kept journals. And then part of it was I found a yearbook from my senior year of high school, and there's this ambiguous inscription in there about a fight with a classmate I don't really remember, and saying, "We hope we can clear this up," and she signs it love. And I have no idea what happened. And that just kept kind of eating at me. And it came together with these things. It came together with the whole Linnaeus thing that started really. I read a story by Fred Chappell called Linnaeus Forgets. And that had been in the back of my mind. I really loved it. And just all of them kind of came together in the book.
Yeah, so that's great. Shifting to you, Sarah, for a second on this idea of characters. You've got a signature character in Alexa Glock. You bring her back in each book, but you add other characters along. You added her brother this time. She's got the police detective. She won't admit it. She kind of likes him a lot. He's part of the deal too. When you're writing this character over a series of books, are you thinking about her arc?
I am. And I think in a series mystery, you don't have to have a huge arc, but definitely Alexa made some growth in this book. With my editor said, you need to resolve things with her stepmother. You need to just let that go. And so I tried to do that in this book, and I thought that was good advice. But when I read your book and then I read Valerie's, I had a little bit of envy of you, Landis, because you have developed so many different characters that I'm thinking about NASCAR Nelly, characters that just jump off the page. And Valerie was doing first person and I was doing third person. And my reader has to stick with Alexa for the whole book. And so there's pressure to really make her a character that somebody's going to want to hang out with.
Yeah.
And then I thought about your question about the villain and how do we develop a villain that is not one-dimensional. And I think I did a really good job in the Bone Track with one particular villain. I did a lot of research on bereavement disorder. And this woman just cannot move on from a trauma that she's experienced, and she's bitter and she wants to kill herself and she has nothing left to lose. And so she's a very scary person for Alexa to be basically locked in a dark room with. So I think that developing a background for our villains is really important too. I'm having a hard time doing that with the book I'm writing now. But anyway, I just think it's something that writers need to consider, not just their main character.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I had fun dealing with Robert Elkin, the villain in my book, try to make him a little bit more complicated than most villains appear, because I'm actually trying to figure out whether I should bring him back in the next book in some way, that he gets kicked out of the firm, but he ends up working for a developer or something. I'm not sure about that yet, but
Yeah, I hope you do.
it's the idea, so they can bust heads again and
Yes.
in the next book. But Valerie, for you, you do have a complicated villain. I'm not going to say anything more about this because I don't want to give anything away. But it's I'm gonna leave it at that, because if I start asking questions about that, I might give too much up there.
Right.
Yeah. So we talked about plotting, and just in the few minutes we have left, we're going to talk about mystery authors you like to read. But we've talked about structure. We talked about 3-act structure. We talked about different things to do. But in all of them, there are clues and there are reversals. And you dropped, particularly after I read Valerie's book, I want to go back and read it again to try to find some of the clues that I might have missed. And of course, you drop clues too in your book, Sara. And I'm wondering if those are the kind of things you maybe don't get in the first draft, but realize, to be fair to the reader, you've got to go back and make sure you've left some of those clues. Talk about that, Sara.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things that I'm doing now with meticulously plotting my 4th book, that it's easier to do that. I'm seeing, I'm going back a lot and inserting things, whereas when I wasn't plotting, that was harder to do.
Right. Okay. And what about you, Valerie? Did you find yourself going back to place clues here and there after the first drafts? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because I was just, writing through, I had a general direction the story was going to take, but then I had to go back and in the interest of the plot, get some of these things in there and shape it that way.
Do you think you'll come back to this character, Valerie, in another book?
I've never done a sequel. I've always done one-offs. And the strange thing is, right now I'm working on a sequel to the Bones. And I can see that Maggie could come back. I can see her getting into more trouble.
I think
and Drexel says something to her that he'll be watching out for her because her secrets are going to cause her trouble. And so, I think I could definitely come back and do more.
And Sara, can you tell us where Alexa's going in the next book, or is it too early to talk about that?
Oh, no, my gosh. I'm just all immersed in it. But, a lot of these Silicon Valley CEOs are buying up land in New Zealand and building bunkers. And so Alexa finds a body in a bunker in book 4. And it's
you know what happened just a second ago, folks? I don't know if the audience heard it, but we activated my Alexa over here.
I'm sorry about that. It's a terrible choice for a main character's name.
Started talking to me again. What do you want? Yes.
I can't do anything about it now.
I'm going to have to shut it off the next time I do an interview with you, just so that it doesn't start playing country music or something.
My mother warned me. That's all I can say, and I didn't listen.
No, I like it. We've already talked about settings. So, as we, I guess just maybe as we wrap up here, mystery authors that you've enjoyed reading. Valerie, you have one or two that you want to suggest?
I tend to read pretty widely. I'm not really centered on mystery, though I love it. My first authors were Poe and Hawthorne, who were on the shelves in the house. And so I read them very early. And then I read Sherlock Holmes, which I loved, and Agatha Christie and Du Maurier and James Lee Burke, really like his. But I'm going to mention Shirley Jackson because I love that borderland of fantasy, horror, and mystery where she inhabits.
What about you, Sara?
Two mysteries that I've enjoyed reading lately are Tana French's The Searcher. It's a close third person, and her writing reminded me of yours, Valerie. It's lyrical. I feel like Tana French must be a poet as well, just for her dialogue and her lyrical writing. And then right now I'm reading Elizabeth George, Something to Hide, and she is just a master at setting the scene. It's 100 pages in. We don't have an inciting incident, but she's just a master of developing characters and setting the scene. And I'm right there with her.
That's great. And I'll start with the Agatha Christie. Of course, I've enjoyed reading her. Walter Mosley, I read him recently, and I have enjoyed reading more contemporary authors like John Hart, who was on the podcast, and Craig Johnson, who writes the Wyoming Sheriff Mysteries, which I find very,
Yes,
very intriguing.
he's my neighbor in the bookstore, Landis.
Oh, yes, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, Johnson and Johnson.
Okay. All right. Well, and then Richard Osman, who wrote the Thursday Murder Club. I read that book after I finished mine. I thought, man, he's good at that, you know, and it's a fun read. And
It
so
is a fun read.
there are a lot of great mystery writers out there and books, and it's one of the, you know, when you you know that because when you look at the rank of your book on the big A out there, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of mysteries, you know, so you know we're fighting that, but people love to read mysteries. And so let's get to some final thoughts here on you know, one or two takeaways for someone who wants to write or think about writing mysteries that you believe is important of the things we've talked about, and maybe some things you've learned. This kind of gets back to the, you know, well, if I'd told myself this when I, you know, was a younger writer, I might have done better when I got started. And so let's start with you, Valerie.
Let the characters lead. That's for everything I write. That's always been the important thing, and that means that sometimes I do a lot of revision and going back and backfilling things, but that voice has to be right. And once the voice clicks and the character takes off, you know, wonderful things happen. You know, characters arrive, like you say with Chuck Yeager, that, you know, all of a sudden he's in every scene that you don't expect. And so I just have to trust the character.
Yeah.
How about you, Sara? Thoughts?
There's definitely some magic in writing for sure when you talk about characters taking on, you know, a life of their own. But for me, the number one thing that's helped me, well, two things. Number one is a writing group. I think I have become a better writer because I'm a member of a writing group, and they have to hear what I've written and they help me with it. And that's the best money I've ever spent. And then, like all three of us, reading widely. And I read and I write about every single book I read, and I just try to analyze it. It doesn't take away from the story for me, but I try to analyze what the author did well or didn't do, what the structure was like, and poetry, literary fiction, mysteries, just read.
Yeah, I love reading, and I've been reading all these hard copy books for the podcast, but I recently got out my Kindle again and dusted it off. For some reason, I think I can read faster on it. I just hit my thumb like this, and the pages turn. But for me, I guess for one takeaway is that in my own experience in writing this book is that find something that you're really passionate about, that you're curious about, that's going to drive you, that's going to cause you to want to keep your seat in the chair. And I didn't do a good job of plotting this book. I kind of left myself with cliffhangers. I was kind of curious. Well, I wonder how I'm going to get out of this. You know, I wonder what is going to happen. Yeah. Is Chuck right or is Craig right or whatever? You know, and so I enjoy that. So, like, you know, I do want to think about plotting some and more, maybe not a high level, but a maybe general level, just so I can write another book in a year. But you know, I do love the magic of you know, trying to just let the characters and the plot take you where it wants to go. And that, I think that can happen sometimes if you're really excited about the project. Find something. I heard somebody said on the podcast, I don't know who it was, but you know, there are themes in every book, but you don't necessarily have to write a book with a, you know, as if you're preaching, and yet finding the theme that works for you and your book will enrich that book so much more, you know. And so I think it's in fact, I think Stephen King said he doesn't write to a theme, but he kind of reads back what he's written and tries to find the themes that are arising in the book. And y'all's books both have themes in them that come to the surface as well.
And yours has a beautiful theme.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. Dealing with life after 65, I guess. And that is, these are all great takeaways. Let's talk about where folks can find your books. Valerie, your book is coming out in May, is that right? So.
May 10th. And of course, it's at the usual online places, but locally, Scuppernong, Bookmark, Sunrise, Pig City, McIntyre's, Quail Ridge. and bookshop online, which I really like because some little bit comes back to local bookstores if you order through there. So.
Yeah, I write a blog called Wade Scripts. I put it out I commit to do one a month, and I wrote one blog on bookshop because I didn't really understand it and how it worked, but it's a great way to support local bookstores. Whenever you order through bookshop, the proceeds go to bookstores around the country, so independent bookstores. So Sarah, your book is out, the third book is out, so where can people find it?
Yeah, you can find it all the usual places, Barnes and Nobles and Amazon and local bookstores, Flyleaf and McIntyre's and The Regulator. So all those good places.
That's great. Now y'all got them in print. You'll have them in ebook as well. Is that right?
Yep. And they're doing an Audible, so all good. Has a wonderful narrator.
That's great. Yeah, and my books will be out. The print book will be out April 5th. The ebook's out now. The audiobook I think is out now because you can't time that sometimes. But April 5th is what I'm calling the launch date. It'll be available, in Parker Books, Main Street Books, and Quail Ridge, and McIntyre's, and I think up in Malaprops as well. So just around different bookstores, and so yeah, it's going to be fun. And I know y'all are excited. We were talking before the show about how exhausting it can be to launch a book. You forget more than needs to be done sometimes. But this is good. It's been great having you on our Charlotte Readers Live. Valerie, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Landis.
Yeah, and Sarah, thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be with both of you.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So viewers, pick up the books. We've got In the Lonely Backcountry is coming out in early May. We've got The Bone Track, which is the third in the Alexa Block series, and we've got Deadly Declarations, and we're all excited about the books, and give them a read, and go leave a review. That's what we say. I wrote a blog post about that too. What's in it for people when they leave a review? First of all, it's freedom of speech. You can give your opinion, and if you don't like it, say so. And if you do, say so.
Yeah.
As well. But so, all right. Well, we're gonna sign off. I'm gonna hit the stop button here and hang around a minute, Valerie and Sarah, and we'll talk a second. But folks, we'll see y'all, and
thanks everyone.
Thank you.